Welcome to Psychopath in Your Life. I'm your host, Dianne Emerson. This is episode number 9. I would like to talk today. In the past, we've been talking about the need to look beyond checklists to help identify psychopaths in your life. Interestingly enough, I received several emails from listeners talking about their physical and mental pain in trying to get out of current relationships, both in person and a couple of them involve work situations. The comments in the emails, I won't read them all to you, but I'll just kind of boil it down here a bit. The comments range from feeling exhausted, sleepless nights, high anxiety, and on and on. So with that in mind, today I want to address how your physical and mental health has been impacted. And both your physical and mental health makes things harder to identify a psychopath and understand who you're dealing with, and most importantly, how to move on and heal. I would have to say that over the years, from hearing from victims at my forum, that I would guess 99.9% of victims of psychopaths suffer from pretty severe PTSD. It's an issue that isn't limited to soldiers in war. We tend to think of PTSD, we've just kind of been evolving on that over the years, and finally we recognize that people that serve in wars and high combat areas do come away with severe PTSD. But when you're dealing with a psychopath, in a way you are at war. You're at a war between good and evil. So if you've gone through a traumatic experience, it's normal to feel lots of emotions, such as distress, fear, helplessness, guilt, shame, or anger, and also along with that, severe isolation. So I'd like to be very clear that this chat is not an attempt to diagnose you, but to provide some things for you to consider, and also some things that you might take up with your doctor or be able to go to the Google machine and look up. So anyways, the trauma from dealing with a psychopath is a real and painful event in a person's life, not to be minimized by those who might tell you, oh, just get over it, move on. I told you this was going to happen. So for today, let's talk about why do we want to talk about this? Well, for starters, it can really complicate your ability to remove yourself from a situation. And also, it can cause a lot of issues that can keep you from healing and that need to take place to move forward. I'm hoping by talking about this topic, you might find a path that will work for you. So let's talk about why does PTSD come into play and how do you get it? Well, you spend a lot of time being told you're crazy, gaslighting, and in general, you're isolated. PTSD can cause things to get more amplified. For example, these situations can cause you to come away from the relationship with problems associated with fear, worry, and anxiety, like I mentioned above. You've spent time being on high alert looking for ways you might get further burned now or in the future. You're always on edge. You feel like you're sitting on the edge of your chair. All of this piles up and makes decisions even more complicated. But the interesting thing about PTSD is that it happens over time. So as it moves along, your body and your system seem to adjust to this higher levels until you finally get to the point that all these other issues start to crop up. And along with that, you've been told you're crazy, found yourself isolated from family and friends, and all these things over time start to play a part. So it takes a lot of time to get to this position. It certainly does not happen overnight. For example, somebody doesn't walk up to you and say, hey, get involved with me, I'm evil, come on the road with me. They have to be able to lull you into a sense of confidence to get you involved with them in the first place. So it takes a long time, and so by understanding how you're getting there, and so let me explain a little bit about PTSD, the technical definition. It's an anxiety disorder that keeps a person preoccupied by both the past and the future, flashbacks and intrusive thoughts or events. And by the future, we talk about worrying about future events, trying to anticipate behaviors. That's a big one to pay attention to, because when you start to pick up on clues that things aren't going right, you'll have an inner sense that your system will be constantly looking for, is this going to provoke a good reaction or a bad reaction? And most people who experience such events, they do recover from them. But people with PTSD can continue to be severely depressed and anxious for months or even years following the event. And here again, that time frame will depend on a lot of issues. It will depend on how long you were exposed to the anxiety, what kind of support system you have working your way out of it, and we'll be talking in depth about those further down the road. Let me just give you the list that's of the official written list, okay? what happens is your mind becomes a circular pattern, and you start repeatedly thinking about the trauma. You're constantly alert or on guard. You're avoiding reminders of the trauma. So you start to put yourself into positions where you start to modify your behavior so you don't instill the trauma further by the person inflicting this pain on you. You have panic attacks. You have a feeling of intense fear with shortness of breath, dizziness, sweating, nausea, and racing heart. Your physical symptoms can be vast. I mean, you could all of a sudden, a lot of people they have found with PTSD also suffer from autoimmune disorders. And by that can cause symptoms of chronic pain, headaches. And combined with that, you have a great feeling of mistrust. You lose your trust in others, and you don't really know who you can trust. And so with that, you start to see the world in a very dangerous place. And problems in daily living start to really take a toll on you, because typically by the time the PTSD is setting in, you're pretty much been isolated in your thoughts and your behaviors, people around you. So you start to have problems functioning in your job, at school, work, or in social situations. And the big one becomes a depression. It's a persistent and anxious or empty mood, loss of interest in one's, let me read this, see here, get this quote for you correctly. Depression, persistent, sad, anxious, or empty mood, loss of interest in once enjoyed activities, feelings of guilt and shame, or hopelessness about the future. Other symptoms of depression may also develop. So, that's where you start to see that you've gone from this hopeful, loving person, you're into this relationship, either at work or in thing, and pretty soon you're starting to develop into a person that your friends and family don't recognize, and clearly you probably have a hard time recognizing yourself. So, how did you slide into the PTSD? Well, in future episodes, I'd like to be talking about the how these things happen. But for now, I'd like to say this. I'd like to give you an example of gaslighting, and I'll read you the official definition. And this is how you start to become off balance. Okay, here it is. Gaslighting, quotes. Gaslighting is a form of mental abuse in which information is twisted, spun, selectively omitted, the abuser or false information is presented with the intent of making victims doubt their own memory, perception, and sanity. See, that's how it starts to chip away at you. And then pretty soon you start to evolve into these other systems that we're talking about with the PTSD. And I'd like to give you an example to show you just a minor example of how things start to chip away at you. And this is a good example from the process from one of the people that I interviewed in my book. And this is his direct quote. So I'll put quotation marks here so you don't think that I'm saying this. Sometimes when I'm particularly frustrated, I'll land a really precise blow to an emotional weak spot, but do it in an apparently oblivious way, like, you're unfit for motherhood. You're incapable of relaxing. That is why you don't have any friends. These can all be entirely true, but they sort of slip out in a very calculated, rational tone, and therefore don't sound like they're being said purely out of anger. In other words, they use a certain tone to, it's like saying, the sky is blue outside, by saying, you really, don't have many friends, or you'd make a horrible mother. And then he goes on to say, I will later claim that they were said purely out of anger, but perhaps drop in but there's some truth to it. So see, when you start to question this person and say, gee, I was really hurt by you throwing out this comment about I don't really have any friends, and then you'll say, well, it was anger, but, there probably is some truth to it, which it starts to acknowledge what they've said, but then it minimizes and takes it away, spins it backwards. What I'd like to conclude with here is your health and mental health well-being are part of being under attack with psychopath. Your sense of reality is skewed. So in future episodes, we'll talk more about the example I gave you above that start to chip away at the core of the real you and how you end up in this spot. It's a very slow, long process. It doesn't happen overnight. So with this, I'd like to say, try to be kind to yourself. That's a really tough one when you're feeling so much anxiety, because you were targeted because you're a kind and caring person. So let's not lose sight of returning to the core of your being, which is a kind and caring person. this whole thing isn't about learning to be mean and nasty to be able to survive in relationships. It's about how to modify things in our lives, how to stop painting those red flags white, and to move forward in a healthier way, being this core of the same person that we remain, but knowing that when we see these signals, we'll know what to do. We'll know how to respond. We won't be so quick to just align ourselves with somebody who is, in effect, emotionally abusing us. So I really appreciate your time. I would really like it if you would subscribe to the show so I know that you're out there. I do read all of your emails and we'll look forward to commenting on them here on the show. I've given you a couple of ways to write to me, and you can go to psychopathinyourlife.com, which is the same name of this podcast, and you have two ways that you can contact me, both via email and also from a private message box, so that your identity is, left anonymous, and so that you're free to ask whatever questions that you like. So be safe out there, and I will look forward to chatting with you next week on Tuesdays. Goodbye for now.